Hey, this is David, pastor of Hamilton Life, and I want to thank you for taking a listen to our podcast. For more information on our church and how you can support the ministry, you can visit us online at hamiltonlifechurch.com. Thanks again for taking a listen, and we hope you enjoyed the podcast today.
Well, good morning. We've been in a conversation over the last several weeks describing or walking through the days of our week. And what we've done is we have looked at how the rhythm of our world has shaped the way that we live on a regular basis. So if you've been missing, then you can go through our podcast and catch up. We went through Sunday, which was the day of rest. We went through Monday, which is the day that all things are created new. We went through Tuesday, which is facing the battle. This morning I want us to talk about Wednesday. What are your feelings on Wednesday? Good, bad, negative? Long day. I've noticed, hump day. I've noticed that Wednesday's like, it's not Friday, but it's not Monday. And then people who work all the time are like, it's just another day that I work. The idea, though, is that Wednesday's like this neutral space that we live in. But what I love about Wednesday is that the origin of the word and the name and the reason they named it Wednesday is super weird. So I realize you came to church, and I realize you wanted to learn about Christ, and we're going to, but you're going to have to give me a minute. Are you good? Okay, so the way that Wednesday worked was it used to be called Woden's Day. In Old English, it was Woden's Day. And it was named after Odin. It was Odin, who was Anthony Hopkins, I believe, in Thor, right? His character is Odin. And so they named the day after this mythological god, this Greek god, Odin. But what's so fascinating about Wednesday is that there was this premortal god named Ymir, and he was a giant, and he was evil. And what they believed to be true was that he was so evil, he would spawn evil, he would have evil giant babies out of his armpits. Like, I'm not making this stuff up. This is Greek mythology. Go to school. And what you find out is that these evil babies are coming out, and he had so many evil giant babies that they started to fight. And there was this like epic intergalactic massive battle between all of these evil armpit giant babies, and they killed each other. You know what I'm saying? I told you we were in church and we're going to get to the other stuff, but the idea is that there was bloodshed. And what the Greeks believed, and throughout mythology and throughout Mesopotamia for thousands of years, they believed that what happened was with all this bloodshed and all this carnage, Odin and his brothers came in and they created the world. That they took the blood of these evil baby armpit giants and they created the seas. And they took the bones and they created the mountains. And they took the hair and they created the trees. And that the world was created by Odin out of evil. Now, can you imagine growing up? And this is what you're taught. Is that you are nothing more than the spawn of something or having been created from evil. And that Odin just did the best he could with what he had to work with. And you're just the product of evil. That the reason that we find that this time in history was so violent is because their mindset was nothing but evil. It's all they knew. The world that they lived in was created out of evil. They were the byproduct of evil. And they didn't understand good. And if you could imagine your mindset, imagine being told from the beginning of time that you were nothing more than the byproduct of evil, you wouldn't think good was possible. But in the midst of all of this madness and craziness and weird mythological teachings, we find a book called Genesis. And what happens in Genesis 1:1, many of you have probably heard it, but you've never probably considered Genesis 1:1 in the context of Odin and Ymir and his armpit babies. You have never considered Genesis 1 in the mindset of those in Mesopotamia. Those that have been told that they were created and everything they saw was created out of evil. And in Genesis 1:1, in the midst of this madness, we hear, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That alone would have stopped somebody in their tracks. That alone would have caused someone to go, what God? Odin? Ymir? Who? How? What did he use? What was the template for building this world? In the beginning, God created the earth, a God that didn't pull blood, a God that didn't use bones. He didn't use evil to create something good. And in verse 2, it says, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. What's being said here is that there was no evil giants, no babies coming out of someone's armpit. There was nothing. It was formless. It was empty. But then there was God. There's this complete reversal. And if you were in Mesopotamia at this time and you had been raised to believe what you've been raised to believe, that's all you'd ever heard was this Greek mythology, all of a sudden you're rethinking the way that the world had been created. You're rethinking everything. And in verse 3 it says, "Then God said, let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day. And he called darkness night. And evening came, and then morning the first day. That this word good is critical. In a culture that doesn't understand how good can even be possible, the scriptures are calling what God is making good. And in verse 6, then God said, let there be an expanse between the waters, separating the water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above the expanse. And it was so. God called this expanse sky. Evening came and then morning the second day. Anyone reading this in context of Odin would have imagined what is so different. How did Odin not create the sky from the blood of evil ones? How can God create something from nothing? And how can it be good? And in verse 9, then God said, let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth. And he called the gatherings of the water the seas. And God saw that it was what? See, here's what's interesting about this word good. Is over and over and over in Genesis, we hear the word good. At some point, you're like, I get it, it was good. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to keep over pronouncing the word good, it was good. But here's the problem, is like, for me, good is really kind of a passive word. Like, if my wife, she cooks a lot, and she does a really phenomenal job. If she turns to me and says, hey, how's dinner? And I go, yeah, it's good. She's not going to buy that. You know what I mean? It's a passive word. You don't just go, it's good. How do I look tonight, hon? You look all right. You look good. You know what I mean? Like, we're used to using words like awesome and fantastic and phenomenal and earth-shattering. Like, I had a cup of tea today for the first time from a new place, and it was fantastic. It wasn't just good. It was great. That what happens when God uses this word good, and we read it now, we're like, yeah, but was it? But in context, in a world that was always told that there was nothing but evil, and out of evil was created whatever they could pull together, this word good stood out to everyone. This word good rang loud and clear in a world full of evil. The word good was a complete reversal, that the scriptures were reforming how people thought, but more than that, they were reforming how they behaved. Because you know the way we think causes us to behave in a specific way. Your worldview changes how you behave and how you act. And what had happened was they had been so immersed with evil that they were acting out in a way that was evil because that's all they knew, and God was changing everything. And that's what Wednesday's about. That's Wednesday. Wednesday is the day that we create good. See, here's what I believe about you and me, is that we are immersed with 24/7 news stories of tragedy. It's been proven the news will try to scare us, to draw us back in. We are immersed with 24/7 feeds of things that are scary. We're scared of mosquitoes, and we're scared of vaccines, and we're scared of bug spray, and we're scared of aerosol, and we're scared of fumes, and we can list on and on. You can't drink milk, but then you can. You can't have eggs, but then you can. We're constantly being fed all of this information that we live with this inner sense of fear. And out of that fear, we create things afraid. But what God did for those back in early Mesopotamia, he's doing for you and me. He's freeing us and giving us the opportunity to create good from the good that was created for us. See, God created out of formless, and he brought form. And as we begin to reprogram how we see the world, and we start reprogramming how we see people around us, we stop seeing everyone as evil and negative and bad and harmful. And we start seeing people the way God sees them, as good. And what happens when we reprogram the way we see the world, it changes how we respond and how we react. And we start putting good out in the world. See, here's what I believe about us, is that every single one of us, we have the potential to create good. But a lot of us, we don't use the potential that we have to create good because of fear or anxiety or worry, we keep putting out bad. But what Moses needed people to hear was that everything that God did was good. Everything. And in Genesis 1:27 it says, so God created man, you and me. He created us in his image. In the likeness of God, he created him both male and female. That when God created man, he didn't create us out of any other image other than his own. That we are a direct reflection of God's creativity. We are a direct reflection of his speech and his self-determination, that God created us and we are good. See, there's just all of this debate about whether man is good or man is evil, and we use this thing where we say, you're just human when we make mistakes. You mess up, well, you're just human. You do something you shouldn't have done, you're just human. We use this word as if being a human is a bad thing, but do you know how God created us? He created us to be human. He didn't create us to be anything other than human. That I don't believe being a human is a bad thing. I believe that we've misrepresented it, and we veered away from how God intended us to live, but he created us in his likeness, in his image, to be good. And what I love about Genesis is that the most important book in human history begins with a description of an artist creating a masterpiece. That God speaks things into existence, and they exist. God shapes, and he forms. God creates. In the very beginning, he was the great creator. But the Genesis creation text is not confined to telling us how the world was created, but it continues on to be a witness to God's great creative work and his power that resides in you and me. That if we know that God spoke the world into existence and he created us in his likeness, what potential do we hold to create? What potential do we hold to bring good into the world? That the word creates is not confined to what God did, but it's what God is still doing. Do you know that God didn't quit creating in Genesis? He didn't speak the world into existence, create everything we see, and then go, I'm out. I'm done. This is yours now. Take care of it or don't. You know what I'm saying? Like, we'll see what happens if you don't, but do what you want. I'm done. I'm going to create, and then I'm out. God is still creating in our lives. He's still creating every day. And what happens in science and philosophy is we debate this discussion. When was the world created? If you sit in a college class at any point in your life, that discussion has come up. Do we have an old earth? Do we have a new earth? And we seek to find the answer to this question as if that's going to prove or disprove God. I don't care when the earth was created. I just want to get in on the creation. I don't want to miss what God's still doing. Whether it was new or old, I don't mind. I just want to know what God's doing next, and I want to know what part I play in creating good. See, a lot of us, we want to know what our purpose is. We want to know what our calling is. We want to know what we're supposed to do with our lives. I'll tell you, create good. Be the good in the world that you so desperately need to see. That you and I have the potential to be good and to create good out of the goodness of a God who made us in a formless world and brought things to life. We then create. That I want to be a part of that. I don't want to miss what God is doing. And so I want Wednesday to be the day where we stop and we either create good or we reflect on what we've been doing and what we've been creating and how we've been living, and we choose to see it as good. See, I think a lot of us were hard on ourselves. Do you notice that you're much harder on yourself than you are on the people around you? You're much harder on yourself than other people are on you. That we're hard on ourselves. We're very critical of ourselves. That I think at some point we're hustling and we're working and we're trying and we're striving, but we're so critical that we never see what we do and the work that we put into the world is good. It's never enough. We always feel like we have to do more or be more or create more. And if we're to rest on Sunday and we're allowed God to create something new in us on Monday, and on Tuesday we're to face the battle that comes with creating new, then I think Wednesday needs a day where we push the pause button and we start to reflect on what God's doing and what we're doing. And we start seeing good. Maybe for you, Wednesday is a day where you intentionally create something good. Maybe you tip a little extra. Maybe you tip just a little more because you know that's going to bring good into somebody's life. Maybe you call that person that you've been estranged from. Or you send a text just encouraging somebody, or a handwritten letter. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it later. The idea is that we have an opportunity to create good. And I think instead of us going, well, I'll get around to it, we wake up on Wednesday and go, okay, what can I do today, God? What good can I bring into the world today? Doesn't have to be large. Doesn't have to be massive. You don't have to end world hunger. If you can, cool, but you don't have to. The idea is that we can start somewhere, and it might just be sending a text saying, I believe in you. Don't give up. It might be something as simple as making a phone call and saying, hey, I'm just checking on you. It might be as simple as being kind, extra kind to that coworker that's going through a tough time. The idea is that we can bring good into the world if we're intentional about the way that we live. Here's the reality is that creation hasn't ended. God's not done. He didn't set everything into motion and then walk away. What happens is God continues creation in our hearts. Creation continues in our hearts. And in Psalms 51, it says, God, create a clean heart for me and renew a steadfast spirit within me. I love this passage. It's David and he's crying out, God, create a clean heart for me. Create it. Not repair mine, not rebuild mine, but create it. We cleaned our house this weekend. And we do most weekends. It's not like a rare thing. We clean it all the time. There's a bunch of us, and my kids are messy. I'm not, but they are. And so we're cleaning. And I'll be honest. This is since Margie's not in here. I clean the entire downstairs by myself. So like half the house. You know what I mean? Floors, countertops. Like that's a lot, everybody. So I cleaned the entire downstairs. She was gone. She came home, and she's like, the kitchen's a mess. It's like, no, I cleaned. What had happened was I cleaned downstairs, and I went upstairs to start cleaning also, which I didn't actually end up doing because a nap was asking for me to hang out with it. And so I went upstairs, and when I went upstairs, my boys went downstairs, and they started cooking. They started making things, like just a mess is what they made. They cooked up a mess, and so it looked messy. Here's the idea, though, is that the moment we ask for a clean heart, and we walk out of this space, we're going to start getting it dirty again. That creation we can't stop here and go, okay, I need a clean heart. All right, I'm good. I'm good for like 9 months. We're easily done. The year, that's it. We keep inviting God to create in us a clean heart, a pure heart. And the reason that we need this clean heart is because residue begins to build up on our hearts, which reduces our capacity to love other people, to see other people the way Christ sees them. Anybody a little cynical or jaded with mankind right now? You get a little disappointed in humanity, like maybe we've lost all hope. Maybe the next generation will get it right, but this one's probably not going to. See, there's this thing where we start building up all of this resentment and anger and bitterness in our hearts, and it begins to affect how we see the world and treat the people around us. And all of a sudden, we stop putting good into the world, and we actually become like the people that we despise, right? Like when you get cut off in traffic and you're like, and you make gestures, you become the very person that you hate. You are part of the problem. But if we choose to be part of the solution, then we choose to see the world the way God sees it. And we purpose in our hearts to create good, but we need God to give us a clean heart, a new start, that David wasn't inviting the creator of heaven and earth to come and just hang out with him. He was coming to create something brand new inside of him. Can you imagine the gravity or the weight of understanding that the God who created and spoke into existence everything now pauses to focus on your heart? How humbling is that for us to go, God, I know you made like some really cool stuff and we don't understand the zebra, but maybe one day we will, but now you're going to stop doing all of those things and you're going to focus your time and attention on my heart. And yet, a lot of us, we take that for granted. The reality that Creator of the universe cares enough about you to create a new heart in you. And in 1 John 1, it says, if we confess our sins, then God is faithful and righteous to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That the Creator of heaven and earth wants to turn his attention toward you and me. The second thing that happens is creation continues in our life. It's not just our heart, but creation continues in our lives. The reality is, and you may not agree, but art changes the world. I love arts. I love the reality that art challenges us, and it changes our perspective of a world that sometimes gets warped, that art changes the world. See, what I love is that our lives are a work of art. Whether you feel like a masterpiece or not, whether you feel like you are creative or not, your life is a work of art that God has created you as this beautiful work of art, and the way that you live, and the way that you talk, and the way that you interact, and the things that you find your hands doing is art. And it has the potential to shape and change the world around you if you'll choose to see it that way. But many times we feel like we're too broken. We feel like we're too far gone. We feel like we've messed up or we've ruined our reputation or our name to the point where we can't create good or be good in this world any longer. And I've been in that space, and I'll probably be in that space again where I feel like I've messed up too much to be a good example. I've messed up too much to encourage my kids to be good. I've messed up too much to try and tell other people how to live, and we feel like we're useless. But then I found this beautiful Japanese art technique. It's called kintsugi. Anybody heard of kintsugi? I've probably butchered the name, but the idea is that kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery. They take all of these shattered pieces and they lacquer it, and they sprinkle like a little gold or silver dust into the lacquer, and when they piece it all together, all of a sudden, instead of hiding all the cracks or broken pieces, they accent it. Instead of hiding the brokenness, it actually becomes part of the art. And that, for me, changed everything. It changed everything, that God isn't necessarily looking to hide my brokenness. And he's not really even trying to illuminate it so that everybody sees how broken I am, but he wants to make it part of who I am and part of my story. That your life, even your broken moments, are part of who you are. And God will use those broken moments to show people that he is faithful, that he's not done creating. And if you've ever messed up royally, if you've ever just really broken something, maybe it's somebody's heart, or it's something more or less, could be a job, whatever. If you've ever broken something, you understand how hard it is to pull or piece that back together. But when that comes back together, and it may take months, it may take years, you're able to look back and see how God was at the very center, the epicenter of your life, piecing things back together. And he's using that to tell a story to the world that he's still creating. That he's not done when he created heaven and earth and the sky and when he formed man out of the dust of the ground, but he's still creating in your life and mine. And in Jeremiah 18, we find this really fascinating passage. Jeremiah is a prophet, and his main job was to hear from God, but he goes through this dry spell. Anybody ever been like a dry spell? You know, he's just like, you're just out of it, and he's not hearing from God at all. And so he begins calling out to God. And in Jeremiah 18:3, it says, "So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, working away at the wheel. But the jar he was making from the clay became flawed in the potter's hands, and so he made it into another jar." I love that. It's like, it's not working out. It's not a coffee cup. It's an ashtray. In verse, whatever the next verse is, "As it seems right for him to do." Everything turns into an ashtray. The reality is our lives placed in the wrong hands, they turn into an ashtray. They get messed up. But when God gets a hold of our lives, he starts working and reworking and reworking and reworking and reworking. And I love that we're never too far gone or too broken. My wife and I, we have this constant dialogue, this theological deep debate while we're driving in the car about whether God knows the future or whether he's inviting us into the future, and we're sort of along the way, and I love this debate and discussion. She gets a little more passionate than I do, but the reality is that if you feel like God has called you to do something and you do something else, you're not done. God's not done with you. If it's a marriage and it's separated, didn't work out, God's not done. You're not through. You're not finished. What he does is he takes your life and he scrapes you back on the wheel and he just starts forming you again. And you go and you mess up, you make another mistake, he just scrapes you back on the wheel and he'll mold you again. You're never done. You're never too far gone. That the great artist who created the universe keeps creating you and me and recreating. And I'm so thankful, because if I had one single path to go and I missed it, then I missed God, I'd be so disappointed. God would too. We'd all be done. None of us would be the way we're supposed to be. But fortunately, a God who's gracious and loving and kind keeps pulling us back onto the potter's wheel. And in Jeremiah 18:5, the word of the Lord came to me, "House of Israel, can I not treat you as this potter treats the clay? This is the Lord's declaration, that you have been worked and worked and worked and reworked. And in order for you to create good in the world, you might need to be reworked. You might need to invite God to pull you back on the wheel, and it's not fun. And it's not exciting, but God is so elated to get immersed in your life and to form you the way that he wants to form you and to shape you the way that he wants to shape you. because God does his best work in our brokenness. That God shines the brightest when we're in our worst. And the last thing I want you to know is that creation continues in our legacy. It continues in our legacy. And in Ephesians 2:10 it says, "For we are his creation, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared ahead of time so that we should walk in them." I love this in the NLT version. It says, "We are God's masterpiece." Isn't that cool? That you're God's masterpiece. In the ESV it says, "We are God's workmanship." That Paul is writing to the church of Ephesus, and he's telling them, you are God's workmanship, his masterpiece. That the word that we find, the Greek word for workmanship, is poema, which is where we get the word poem. That you are God's poem. And he's writing the story of your life line by line. And what happens is we don't always understand the line that God's writing next. Or maybe God's writing a line that we don't like. But what we have to understand is that at the potter's wheel, he's making us into what he wants us to be. And what we have to do is we have to reflect God's likeness, his self-determination, and his will. And we have to create good out of what God has given us. That we are his workmanship, created for good works, set aside, set apart so that we may do God's work, that you are his finest work of art. I love that when he created the earth and then he created man, he's like, now it's good. Now it's good. But it wasn't good for man to be alone, and so he created woman, and then it was great, right? So the idea is that God isn't done with you. He's not done with you, but he's inviting you again to start anew. He's inviting you again to get back out and create everything that you feel like the world is lacking. What good do you hold inside of you that the world needs to see? What kind words, what generosity, what work lies inside of you that the world is waiting or needing so desperately, but we're holding it back because we're cynical or jaded. That our life or our heart, it starts with our heart and then it moves into our life. That a lot of us, we try to change our life before we change our heart. Anybody ever try to change your motives or behaviors, but you don't really change the reason you behave that way? That we can't start with our life. We have to start with our heart. And invite God to create a new heart. And then what happens is out of that new heart, it comes our life, the way that we live, behave, act, speak, work. And when our heart is right and our life is aligned, then this becomes our legacy. The way that people know us, the way that people speak about us, the way that people come to understand who we are, our legacy ends up being that we put good in the world, that your life is the greatest work of art. It's a work of art waiting to be shared with the people around you. I love our city because they appreciate art. There's little galleries and little hallways and everything. There's just art splattered everywhere. You can now get your picture taken in front of some angel wings right here in Chattanooga. You don't have to go to Nashville. There's art. There's art. As we're painting our building, I was thinking, can I get some angel wings on that too? That could be fun. The idea is that there is art popping up everywhere, and I love it. I love it. But every single place we look, we should see our world as a work of art. Every face, every name, every person we encounter. Now, some of us, we're not finished pieces. You know what I mean? We're not right. You know, we're more of like our eyes are a little wonky, and the ear's not quite right. You know what I mean? We're more of an idea of what art could be. But here's the thing: even art that's not finished is still beautiful art. That God's not done with you. So let's keep placing our hands at the potter's wheel. Watch what he'll create in our lives and in our hearts, and watch what your legacy will be like. But here's my challenge to you on Wednesday, is let's create some good. Let's create some good. Let's stop letting the weeks go by without doing something that we can call good, because God has done so much for us. Would you not agree? That he's done so much for us, but what happens for us a lot of times is we want to capitalize or highlight or accent all the things that our lives lack, but we don't want to look at what God's done. But he's done so much. And if we'll start focusing and paying attention to all the good that God has already done, it'll change our mindset. And we'll help people see that God is still working. He's not done. That he's still using us. That he's still working in our hearts and in our lives. And I love that Ephesians says, for we are his creation, created in Christ Jesus for good works. We don't live lives purposeless. Our purpose is to create good works. So what good works can we create? What good works are waiting for you to step in and create them? What is God inviting you to do? What is He purpose for you to do? What tools and resources has He already given you? See, I believe that you already possess everything that you need to do what God's called you to do. That a lot of us, we wait. We go, okay, well, I'll do good works when I could finally be, rich and self-independent. When I win the lottery, then I'll be able to do good works. And a lot of times people, they'll say to me, hey, if I ever win the lottery, church is going to be paid off, as if that's going to buy them some extra lottery points. The idea isn't that we wait to win the lottery. That's not when we wait until we're self-sufficient. It's not till we wait till we have other tools, but we start here and we start now. And we begin to see what tools we already possess to create good that's lacking in the world. Here's what I want us to do. I want us to stand across the room. And I want us to spend a few minutes. The remaining few minutes that we have together, Jessica's going to come and she's going to lead us in a song. And I want us to allow this moment to be a time of reflection. I want us to reflect upon our lives. I want us to start by looking at our heart. I want us to look at our heart and I want us to evaluate, invite God to evaluate, where is my heart? Is my heart set on you? Is my heart considered good? Is my heart needing to be renewed? Is my heart needing to be replaced, repaired? What is my heart? Where's my heart at? And then the second thing I want us to do is I want us to look at our life. What's our life? Is my life considered good? Is my life headed towards Christ and to create more good? Is the trajectory of my life on the path that I feel like God's called me to be on? And then I want us to begin to imagine the legacy that we might leave. How do we want to be known? How do we want people to see us years from now? What are we doing now to ensure that the legacy that we leave is a legacy of Christ-centeredness? That we point people to Jesus every step of the way. So we look at our hearts, we look at our life, and we look at our legacy. We'll come up and close in just a moment, but I'm going to invite them to begin to sing and to play, and I want us just to invite God to move us and to help us see the world the way He does.